Welcome to episode 96 of the Brainy Business, Understanding the Psychology of Why People Buy. Today's episode features a discussion with Nikki Rausch, who will enlighten everyone with her tips of how to make it easy for people to do business with you. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, I'm very excited to bring back Nikki Rausch, your sales maven, and one of my very favorite people on earth. You have heard Nikki's name on the show before, and even her voice a couple of times. She's actually the first repeat guest ever on the show. But last time she was here, she was doing the interviewing when the Brainy pricing course first launched. Now I'm asking the questions, and we're having more of a comfortable conversation about ways to make it easy for people to do business with you. You will be surprised at how often you are inadvertently making it difficult for people to do business with you, I promise. There is a link to that past episode on the pricing course when she was here before in the show notes, as well as ways for you to reach Nikki, and a link to her awesome new podcast, Sales Maven, which we'll talk about a little during the episode. Those show notes can be found within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/96. If you're already a member of the Brainy Business list, you receive an email from me every Friday with links to all that week's new content, including podcast episodes and new articles, so you can also access the show notes directly from there. If you are not yet on the list and would like to be, simply sign up for any freebie and you'll be automatically added. And for those of you in the States, you can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, BRAINY, to 33777. You'll be added to the list and get a free copy of my ebook as a thank you. We get into her introduction as we kick off the episode, but I have had the joy of knowing Nikki for over 5 years now. We were in the same networking group a ways back and always got along. And when I started doing freelance work while I was still working in my corporate job, Nikki was one of my very early clients. She hired me actually to edit her second book. You may not know, but in the first iteration of doing my business, I did a lot of ghostwriting and a ton of book editing and website copywriting and editing and things like that. I am actually mentioned in the acknowledgements for her book Buying Signals, though my last name is different. Her third book just came out, by the way, called The Selling Staircase. Both of those are linked for you in the show notes. Nikki and I don't study exactly the same thing, but her background in Neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, which she will explain as we get into the interview, has a lot of similarities to behavioral economics. So if you're not familiar, or even if you are, I know you're going to really appreciate and like what she's talking about. It's essentially another version of understanding and speaking better to the brain's natural tendencies. So it's no wonder we get along so well. You're going to love her, I promise. I'm not going to babble on by myself any longer. So without further ado, Nikki Rausch, welcome to the Brainy Business Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. I know that you actually, I think, are officially the first repeat guest on the podcast, but we're flipping it this time. So you interviewed me back about the pricing course when that was launching. And then now I get to showcase some of the really amazing things that you do in your business, which I'm excited about. And I know that the listeners have heard your name many times, but I would love if you can tell everyone a little bit about you. And specifically, we were talking about your credentials in NLP. If you can tell everybody what that's all about.
Well, thank you for asking me to come back. I feel like I at least checked a box that I passed on the interview with you the first time around that you let me come back. So thank you for that. And for the listener, I am Nikki Rausch. My company is Sales Maven. I am a sales coach, trainer, and speaker, author, and now podcaster too. And my background is I have 25 years more now, of sales experience, primarily selling in the technology space. And then in addition to my sales background, I have an extensive background in neuro-linguistic programming. So if that's a new term for anybody listening, it's really the study of communication. So neuro, the way we process information in our brains. Linguistics is the language piece. So how we speak to others, how others speak to us, and also any internal dialogue you have going on in your head. And then the programming part of NLP is about habits and patterns. And I have over 1,200 classroom hours as a student, an assistant, and even a trainer, which most people who have a similar certification than I do have about 200 hours. So
a few more that you have.
A few more. Yeah. So now when I am teaching people around sales, I always bring my NLP background into it. And I really focus on the conversation around sales, like the actual conversation between you and the prospect and the conversations that you're having with your clients, and primarily work with my clients to improve their conversation, the sales conversation, so that they feel confident and they're able to seamlessly move somebody through the process.
I love everything you do, which you know, and I think the audience probably knows because I've talked about you multiple times on the show, but I have read all of Nikki's books, and, little known fact, I guess, is in a previous version of my business. I actually, where we first became friends, really, I mean, we knew each other before, but I think got close, was that you hired me when I was just doing freelance on the side, and I edited Nikki's second book. Mm-hmm. And we've worked together on other things. I have hired Nikki, and I love working with her on different pieces of just the way that you phrase things. It's so good to have an extra set of eyes. And I know we've talked about all these different pieces where we both work in, communicating better with the brain, but have different training. So we talk about a lot of the same things, but in a slightly different way. And I just love everything that you're doing. And I'm so excited about your podcast. And we'll talk about that before we close out the show for sure, because people will want to check that out. But the reason I brought Nikki on today is I had been thinking for a while about this sort of concept of making it easy to work with people, having good communication. And I know that's something that Nikki talks about a lot. Don't know where my thought on this began and yours ended and whatnot, which is why I felt like I needed to bring you on to talk about it, because I know we've talked about this so many times, but just making it easy for people to do business with you and understanding the way people communicate and what they're going to be talking about. I was seeing a lot of communication in my own email where it's people asking for something or looking to set times and making it to where all the effort was being placed on me, where they were asking me for something. And you get into this space where you realize how just so many of us inadvertently communicate in a way that makes it difficult for people to buy and don't even realize it. And so you were then doing a training on great email subject lines. And I thought, we should just have a conversation about this because I love your perspective and I know that the listeners will too. So that doesn't really segue well into a question per se, but I feel
I have some thoughts on it.
Yes, you talk now.
Well, as you know, I have hired you as well. I'm a client of yours and a raving fan of this podcast. And I think our work complements each other really well. And a lot of times you will have a term for something that I'm teaching, a concept or a technique, and you bring in these, the scientific based terminology. And it's been so great to be able to, reference you. I know, because you've given me permission to reference you in my own work. And really what it comes down to is the easier you make it for somebody to take the next step, whatever that step is that you want them to take it. And this works in sales and this works in life. The
Right.
easier you make it for the other person, the more likely they are to follow through. And unfortunately, we have become this society of we want everything to be easy for us. And so sometimes we inadvertently push back onto the person we shouldn't be pushing back on and ask them to do all the work because we want it to be easy for me, right? Like if I'm in the position and I'm asking you to do something and I'm trying to earn your business, like I should not be pushing back on you and asking you to do all the work and jump through a bunch of hoops in order to pay me money or in order to hire me. And unfortunately, it's showing up more and more and more. And I think when this you and I first started talking about, me coming on the podcast and having this conversation, it was in an email. I call it effective email techniques and emails that convert was the training and talking about like, are you making it hard for people because you are putting up these roadblocks constantly or pushing back and asking them to jump through like a bunch of hoops to get whatever it is that means they're going to ultimately become your client. And every time you put up a roadblock, every time you ask them to jump through a hoop, you risk the chance of them going, nah, moving on.
Right. Well, and even not in a, malicious way where people even realize like, thanks, but no thanks, not worth the effort. So much as it gets put in the, I'm going to deal with that later shelf, right? When I have time for that, I'll do this thing. And one of the pieces for this that I love when something that has become a norm, that it feels like you have to do something a certain way and it feels like you're doing the right thing. You feel really good about it. You don't necessarily realize until it's pointed out how ridiculous it actually is. And in this case, and I used to do this a lot too, but so in our brains, you have this feeling when you're saying in an email and offering up times for somebody, you're trying to meet with someone, it feels like, while yes, it is easier for me to not have to look at my calendar and find times that can work. But if I then say, well, what's a good time that works for you? I can justify to myself that I am making myself uber available to you and your time. I'm being so flexible and open that you can pick a time that works. But actually, you're just pushing the work off on somebody else to then come up with times and look at their calendar and do all of this work. But it reframes the question when you put something out there that says, here are some times that work. Do any of those work well for you? And then it's easy to answer the question and say no. And then they come back with some more times. It keeps that conversation going. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things is people will say like, let me know when you're available or tell me when is a good time to talk to you. And frankly, the answer to both of those questions is never, because none of us are just ever available. Most of us live and breathe our calendars. And if it's not on our calendar, it kind of doesn't exist in our universe, especially people who have a lot going on. Right. And so saying to somebody like, let me know when you're available or when would you like to meet? It's kind of, I always equate this to, it's like saying to somebody, you know what I really want, like more than anything in the whole world, and you're the person who can give it to me. And I've just been waiting to ask you for this. Like what I really, really want is world peace. And you look at me like, I don't know what to do with that, Nikki. Like that's so big. And, where do I even begin? And when you give people these like, hey, let me know when you're available or what time works for you, you're essentially saying, hey, stop what you're doing, Mr. or Mrs. like busy person, and get on your calendar and find a bunch of times and then send them back to me. And then I'll make some decisions about whether or not I'm available. And then I'll send it back to you and pick a time. It's like, no, that's not easy for me as the client or as the person you're trying to get a call scheduled with. So the technique that I teach, I call it my 3 times technique. And there's some specific language around it, which is to say, would you be interested in setting up a time to chat? Here are a few possible times. And then I always recommended giving 3 ranges of time. And I correct this oftentimes inside the Sales Maven Society. And I know you're in our group. So because people post their emails to me and I'm constantly rewriting and offering suggestions for them on their messaging. But you cannot say in 3 times, you can't say like Monday, 9 to noon, because then it sounds like you're asking for a 3-hour appointment, which nobody's going to give you. So I always say, make sure you say Monday, anytime between 9 and noon, if you have that open on your calendar. And you do that 3 times, give ranges of time. And I don't care if the range of time is a half an hour range, like 8 to 8:30, or if it's a bigger range that's like 2 to 5. It can be anything. And you don't have to hold those times open on your calendar either, by the way. But anyway, and I'll talk about that. So you give the 3 times and then you say, please pick a time that works best for you. And if you prefer something else, here's a calendar link where you could pick a time in your schedule, or please let me know what time does work and I'll do my best to be available. But you can't make that statement until you've given this 3 ranges of time.
Right. And I know you've talked about, and it's in one of your books, at least, but you have the information, the piece being about someone that you had where when you just throw the scheduling software at people, it can feel really impersonal and like you don't care, where I, as the person with scheduling software, am trying to make it easy to do business. It feels like that's what I'm doing. But if I just say, here's a link to my scheduling, I'm far too important to email you. But like putting the 3 times in there shows I put in some effort. I think that's a little bit of the reciprocity piece. So I care enough to do this for you. I know that in some of your tips too, you've talked about, you want to make sure you put time zones in there. I work with people all over the place. And if I just say from 2 to 5, that means nothing. And so I put Pacific time, or even doing that extra effort. I've actually started doing, if I know someone is in Eastern time, even if I'm in Pacific, I can then put and say, this is going to be, from 2 to 5 Eastern.
Exactly.
To make it that much easier on them. It's a little bit of extra effort, but that's making sure it's easy for them. They see that I did that little bit of work. So making sure that you're not just throwing the scheduler at people. And do you want to share the story of your, clients that have?
Oh, yeah. Well, and just to add on that, and then I'll share the story, is that I am not opposed to a scheduling link. And especially now, I think even since I wrote the book, like scheduling links are even more common nowadays.
Absolutely.
It's the way that you frame it to the person. So you never want to say, here's my scheduling link, find a time on my calendar when I'm available.
Right. Oh, I'm so glad we're transitioning into this. So that getting to the I's and me's of the world.
Yeah. But the story that you'd asked about, what happened was I introduced some clients at a networking event. They had some common interests. One of my clients definitely could have benefited from hiring my other client. They agreed that they would connect outside the networking meeting. And my one client who wanted to earn the business sent a message saying, here's my calendar link. Please pick a time that I'm available, and then I'll talk to you about ways that I could work with you. Okay.
Wah.
And so my other client, the person who was in the position of being the prospect in this case, was super turned off by this and offended. So offended. And also happened to be somebody that isn't real tech savvy. And it just didn't land well. And I know this because they both called me privately to have complete meltdowns about this. The client who got the messaging with the calendar link was like, she actually sent a message back to the lady saying, like, I'm no longer interested in talking to you. Basically, thanks, but no thanks, and go kick rocks. Right. And when she reached out to me, she was like, it's so offensive. It's just about her. She only cares about her. She's just trying to get money out of me. And I feel like she doesn't, she's not even making it easy for me. She's not even taking time out of her day. She's just obviously too busy and too important for me. Which is not the case, because my other client is this sweet, lovely woman who is salt of the earth type person. She's such a good person. And so when she reached out to me to have the conversation and so perplexed by the response, I said, well, let's look at your messaging. Let's look at what your calendar link says. And when you log into her calendar link, it is riddled with I statements. Like, I use a scheduling link to make it easy for me to find times to be, to meet with you, to talk about ways that you can hire me. Right. It was all, I didn't say a bunch of I statements there, but it was so focused on her. And that's not her intention. But what happens when we write is we write from our own perspective. We have a thought, we type it out. Right. And unfortunately, that is never very interesting to the reader. especially when it's a client, a prospect type situation, it should always be for their benefit. So your scheduling link should say, please pick a time that works best for you, right? It should be about the person who's using the link. Because if you sound like, I'm so important and I'm a really big deal and I have this scheduling link, people are like, you're not that important. I can find a million other people who do what you do.
I forget where, I think I was at a networking event and someone was presenting and she was saying how, it's so difficult, but like, I can make some time for you. If anybody's interested, the time's available. And, you have to, I specifically remember she said, you have to be God to get more than 15 minutes with me on my calendar. And I just...
I'm cringing. I'm cringing.
Like, this is your pitch? Is this supposed to... Well, I guess I'm not cool enough for you. That's... Sorry.
Oh my gosh.
But, there is this where, busy used to mean important and being able to show that everyone is so stretched for time because I've got so much going on. I'm glad that that's really kind of going out of trend in a lot of ways. But there is just the, people, the know, like, and trust factor. People talk about that all the time, so we don't need to belabor it. But the simple tweak of removing I statements, it is an easy thing to say. It is excruciating in practice. Maybe not that bad. And I'm getting more used to it, but I'm like putting my Nikki hat on all the time where, I write the email and then I go back and look at it because like you said, I know not to do that. But when I'm writing it, I then write it out once of this is basically what I want to say, and then have to go back in and remove. And I know you've said even, you've been teaching this for umpteen years, but you have to do this yourself too. It's always going to be a little bit out of our nature. I'm sure you do it less than, people that are just starting that practice. But the simple shift of tweaking those can be so impactful on getting more business. I mean, truly, and having people that enjoy having a conversation with you. I love your relationship selling piece to where it's just about kind, generous interactions with people and doing the right thing. And that feels so much more authentic when it's able to get across better when you're coming from this is why this would be valuable for you. I'm thinking about you versus the me.
Exactly. Yeah. And for the I statements, so it's unrealistic to think that you can send every email for the rest of your life and never use an I statement. So it's not a hard and fast, never use an I statement, but I do try to recommend, and I recommend to my clients, and I rewrite a lot of my clients' messaging.
Right.
This is one of the services that I offer. And I see when somebody sends me an email or posts an email for me to review, those I statements, like they pop off the page to me. And one of the ways to check this for yourself, if you're not sure if you're, overusing I statements, is count how many sentences you have in your email. So if you go and count and you go, oh, I have 10 sentences, and then go and count how many times you use the word I. Okay. And then,
okay, there are 25. Is that too many in my 10 sentences?
Yeah. And that's not uncommon, by the way,
I know.
because of the way that people are writing, and even people who are out there selling people on, email scripts and stuff like that. And I have many clients who've bought them and then they show them to me and I'm like, no, that is not interesting to the reader. So it's things like saying like, I want to meet with you, or I care about you, or I want to help. People don't care what you want, what you like, what you want to help. That's not interesting to them. So instead, learning how to make more you type statements and or ask questions. So the 80-20 rule is what I recommend. So if you have 10 sentences, you should not have more than 2 I statements in your full email. And it's saying stuff like, instead of saying, I would like to meet with you to talk about blah, 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 instead say, would you be open to meeting and talking about blah, blah, blah. Now there's no I statement in there. And it does take practice. So I know, I'm laughing too that you had the same response. It does take practice. I still have to practice. And I will say, like for me, it's much easier now because I do this all day long, every day for clients and for myself as well. But when I find that it's the hardest for me is when I'm feeling stressed or if I'm feeling pushed for time.
Right.
And if I feel like I'm in a hurry, that's usually the indication. Do not send that email. Like wait until I can go back and get these I statements out. And I just had this happen not too long ago. A couple months ago, somebody had hired me to do a training for her team. And on Friday evening at like 5:00, and the training was on a Monday or something. And at 5:00 on a Friday, she sends this email about how her team is so excited and looking forward to having me talk about these 2 topics. Well, one of the topics that she put in the training was not the training that I had prepared and printed workbooks for her team about. And I didn't even see the email until Saturday morning. And when I got it, I was like, oh my gosh, I obviously made this huge mistake. I went back in my notes. 3 times in my notes, I had the topic that I had prepared, but what she had put back into an email to me was this like totally different training. So I wrote the email and I was feeling very stressed about it. And then I was like, okay, look at this email. And I could see my I statements in there. I could also feel the pressure in the email. And I didn't in any way break rapport with her and be like, no, this is the training that you and I agreed to. This is what, blah, blah, blah. Like, you don't want to break rapport. So instead, I spent quite a bit of time sending back what I wanted to come across as a very calm and easy email just to check to see. So just checking in about the 2 topics you had mentioned. These were the 2 that I had prepared. Did I make a mistake? So, I'm checking because I'm not saying like, no, you're wrong, because maybe he's right. I don't know. And so let her know that how I would correct it to ensure that her team was delivered the training that they were prepared to receive. And, she got back to me like 2 hours later and she's like, no, you're right. Sorry. I pulled that from something else. And, and it was all fine. And then I actually brought this up because I was actually teaching her team around emails that convert. That was part of the training. And so I brought it up in the room and she was like, I'm so surprised that email back from you that you felt stressed because it felt so calming and it was so easy. Well, I had to take some time to really pay attention to that message because when the stakes are high, and there's, client relationships on the line, it's worth it to slow down, to rewrite this message and think about it. How is this going to be received by the reader?
Right. Absolutely. When you were talking, it reminded me of a couple of things and some specific statements. So I love the way that you transition that to be did I miss something? Instead of that accusatory, like that's not my notes. That's not what happened. But so I interviewed Roger Dooley on the podcast about his book Friction. And he has this great example of the word actually, and that it is actually never helpful to use that word because it just makes the other person sound dumb, right? To say, well, actually, if you go here, you'll find that. One of my trigger ones that I always hated in a corporate space, and I hear it still around all the time, but is does that make sense?
Yes.
Which I cringe and immediately think, well, I'm not stupid, so yes, that makes sense. You just get irritated, irked, right? And so I have advised people to change, instead of saying, does that make sense, to say, did I explain that well? So that again puts a little bit of that responsibility back on you and opens up for the feedback of if something wasn't well explained, it's because I did something improperly, not because you're dumb and you can't make sense of the words coming out of my mouth, which is the way it sounds. Do you have any other terms or kind of catch points? And I apologize that I'm potentially we didn't talk about this in advance, but it just sort of came up in my brain. But are there any others other than the I statements that you kind of always advise around shifting that you see very often?
Yeah. I actually teach around the does that make sense too, because it can be a trigger for somebody.
Yes.
And one of the ways that I love the way you framed it. I think that is beautiful. That's a great way to take responsibility so it's not pushing it onto the other person. One of the ways that I teach is to say, so based on what we just talked about, what questions come to mind for you?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Like that's another way to say it so that it's not putting it. So also it doesn't sound like you made a mistake either. Although I'm totally fine putting things on me to a point because you don't want to be self-deprecating, right? And lose credibility with somebody. The other one that I will say, I'm going to see what you think about this because we did not talk about this ahead of time. I feel like this is heavily used in marketing and it's way too overused because it's used in marketing and I get the concept of it. It isn't always effective in a sales conversation is using the word if and making if statements. So if you'd like to get on a call or if you'd like more information, that is totally unnecessary. So I try to get those out of my clients' messaging too. Instead of saying, if you'd like to get on a call or if you'd like more information and just say, let's set up a time to chat or to receive more information, click here. Like you don't need if in those because there's the concept of if then, which I feel like that's probably something you know way more about than I do. But I know there's a concept of like the if when or if then type statements. But in sales conversations, when you say, if you want to do this or if you want to buy, you're essentially saying to somebody, I think you're talking right to their brain saying, hey, slow down, think about it, make sure you're making a decision.
Not everybody's interested in this right now. Yeah.
Like, no, you're dealing with adults. Let them make the decision, pose the question to them. Instead of saying, if you'd like to move forward, just say, would you like to move forward?
Right. Yes. I think that is so valuable. And it's also in that assuming the sale. So the, in the Snickers example, from which is in episode 11, I will definitely tie back to that on anchoring and adjustment. But this piece of reframing the question of, do you want to buy Snickers to how many do you want?
Yes.
Makes a very different, and it's even just that implied piece where I think if you're interested, and a lot of people wouldn't be, right? It's sort of the way that your brain might be hearing that. Whereas instead, if you just are saying, here's the thing.
Yeah.
You're ready now. You want this, and now every question or piece that I'm putting in my brain after that is now saying, but if you have questions, which is like, oh, stop it. Stop saying if. Now that's going to be in all of my.
That'll be your new one.
Yeah.
You'll be thinking, dang, Nikki.
I know you've primed me for it.
And there was one more I was going to add to and I think your Snickers example, which by the way, I cannot tell you how many people quote Melina's Snickers example. Like they use that to me all the, when Melina talks about, it's like the Snickers thing that Melina talks about. So many people talk about that. It's such a great, such a perfect example. And so many people that I know tie that right back to you.
Oh, thank you.
The other one is, do you have questions?
Right.
And that's not something that I think is effective because it's kind of like saying, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
When you say to someone, do you have questions or do you have any questions? A lot of people don't want to sound stupid. Hopefully none of us want to sound stupid. I try really hard not to. And yet sometimes I feel stupid, right? So some people will have a knee-jerk no to the, do you have any questions? And unfortunately, in sales, if you don't get them, if people aren't allowed and offered the opportunity to ask the question that they need answered in order to buy from you, you will not earn their business. So instead of saying to somebody, do you have questions? What I will recommend is, what questions come to mind so far?
Right. And I love a very similar suggestion to this when you're doing a presentation. And so they always want you, so, you're speaking at an event and then they say they want to have, it's an hour-long presentation and leave 10 minutes for questions. And for anyone who's ever had who has a question, and then you stand there in the room of crickets and nobody wants to ask, is the very different of who has the first question is, one that's been put out there. And then, you give it a second and then you can sort of say, a common question I get is right, to help get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where that slight reframe, the tiniest hint of a shift can make so much difference in the way that it's pinging your brain. And I did an article for Inc. and I was talking about the Starbucks barista when I was going through the drive-through. And instead of saying, is that it? Do you need anything else? Where you kind of have that instant, no, that's it. That the question was, and what else sounds delicious today?
Mm-hmm. I heard that episode. I love that.
Yeah. Which then you go, ooh, well, a marshmallow dream bar sounds amazing, actually, now that you say that.
now that you posed the question.
Right. Well, and then I gave the example of in a grocery store and they say, did you find everything okay?
Mm-hmm.
How many people actually found everything they were looking for okay and easily at the grocery store? Or so often we leave and we don't have everything we intended or we're hoping to find, but it's not worth having the conversation or bringing it up. And so, did you find everything okay? Yes. Yep. Stop talking to me. Let's get out of here, sort of a thing. But if you say, what's the one thing that you couldn't find when you were looking? Or is there something we should have someone grab for you that might have been missed? Whatever.
Yeah. Was there anything on your list that you didn't find today?
Absolutely. Right. Just that slight.
Of course, I go to the grocery store with a list. Now you know that because.
Good. It's helping with the overwhelm where, the rest of us are buying all the cookies and chips of the world. So,
well, they're on my list. That's
right. So you plan to buy. Oh yeah. That's hilarious. I love that. Okay. So what other top tips do you have when it comes to, I know we were talking a little bit about, so I guess frame this on email and also making it easy for people to do business with you, which I know is a lot of what you do. So you can't cram it all into this one episode here, but what would be one more tip if you were going to give to the audience that ties in with kind of what we're talking about on theme today?
One of the tips that I would give here, and you and I kind of talked a little bit about this before we actually started recording, which was this mentality of how we do what I call a go fish type response to clients, or when you're working with somebody. If people don't understand how to take the next step, if all you're doing is saying, I think the example you and I were talking about is how somebody will send you something and say, you need to fix this. And then you fix it. And then you're like, okay, now what? But
Right.
Instead, if that person would take it upon themselves to say, when you fix this one thing, then we'll move to the next step. Right. And then take the action to move to the next step. Or let people know like what it is. I often say this too. It's like if you call your doctor's office and you say, I'd like to make an appointment to see the doctor. Oftentimes the front desk people are so guilty of this go fish type mentality. They'll say, when would you like to come in? And you go, Thursday at 10. Oh, I'm sorry. The doctor's busy that day. When else would you like to see the doctor? And you're like, Monday at 2. Oh no, the doctor's busy that day too. Is there another day? And you're like, could you just tell me when the doctor is available? And so when you're doing this with clients, if you start having this back and forth, this lobbying, like you say this, then they say that, then you say this, then they say that, you're starting to play this like go fish mentality, and somebody will stop playing, and it's often going to be the client. They'll just say, thanks, no thanks. I'll just move on. And they may not even tell you, but they'll start ghosting you. And so when you want someone to take action, you need to always have a clear next step laid out for them. So so here's the last tip I'll leave around this, unless you want to really dig into this a little bit more, but it's kind of like, don't say to somebody who you've gone through the sales process with them and they're like, I better think about it. Don't say, oh, okay, great. Yeah, think about it and I'll reach out to you next week. That's a go fish response. Instead, say, great. How much time would you like to think about it? Let's get a time scheduled on our calendars next week or whenever to circle back on this. And then you get a time scheduled. And now we're not playing go fish. Now we have a time scheduled. You have challenged their brain to actually think about it before the next scheduled time, and you're much more likely to earn their business if you can keep it easy for them to take the next step. But you calling them like next week sometime, I don't know about you, but at this point, you cannot just call me randomly out of the blue and expect me to answer your phone. Like, I won't answer my phone that way.
Well, Nikki, if you call me, I'll answer because it says that it's you.
That's true, right?
Right.
Well, you and I Voxer. I think that's our main form of communication, is that we have an ongoing Voxer chat.
Yes.
Yeah. Forever and ever.
Yep. Celebrating wins and asking questions, all sorts of good stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm so glad that you brought up the circle back call. So audience and, world that is listening now, there are so many genius tips that Nikki provides in all of her books, and she's got a great newsletter. There are a lot of people that you get the newsletter and kind of go, bleh, I don't need to read that. I don't care about it. I save all of Nikki's. I know so many of the tips, but I always like to have them. They're so well put together, and I just love all of the things that you have out there sharing. But the removing the I statements, the circle back, these, the 3 times in the email, these little things, they're such a small shift, but because they are well aligned with that neuro-linguistic programming, the way that the brain likes to communicate, they make such a difference. And even, at the networking group, instead of handing everyone your cards when we're back and able to be in person meetings again, we're recording this during, coronavirus pandemic, that instead of just saying, oh yeah, here's my card and call me, that's sort of the same as here's my scheduling software. I'm so important and find a time to meet with me. That instead, if you say, oh, like you phrase it all the time, Nikki, is, I keep my calendar right here on my phone. And let's go ahead and find a time right now, if that works for you. It feels a little bit awkward at first when you start doing this, where you think someone's going to feel like it's being weird or I'm being pushy. They don't. They absolutely don't. And even I do this when I'm getting off of one call, even with, so clients that I have booked that have however many strategy sessions, and we know that there's just going to be a next one. And I have a scheduling software they could go book, but more often than not, I try to find a time before we get off the phone to get the next one on the calendar, because if it's out there just sort of in la land waiting for them to book, it takes forever and it just sits in, lies in wait. And that's with people that have already paid me.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm trying to earn the business. I want to help them to actually take the time. So people just get busy. It's nothing against you. But if you are the person who's scheduling the time, they know they're going to talk to you at a certain time. They're excited about it. Or at the very least, they're going to pick up the phone, right? That makes it to where it's that much easier to keep going. And just from those slight little tweaks, you will just convert so much more than everybody else.
It's so true. People will respond to you differently. Your interaction with your clients will get so much better. They'll hold you in higher regard because you make everything easy for them, and you're easy to do business with, and your level of professionalism will stand out from the competitors.
Absolutely. I know that you've said, and I have the same experience for when people reach out to have me speak at events or to participate and work on things, and coming back with the 3 times. And I have the packet of information already available. And so you are the first person, I haven't done a ton of interviews on the show so far, but where it got booked and not even, I have a email that says, oh, here, we're excited. There's not much to prepare in advance, but if you can send me a bio and headshot. I didn't even have time to send that out because it made its way to me of, typically I know that when Nikki does interviews, came from your assistant, but I know that's based on your setup, right? So typically these things are asked for. Here they all are. I didn't even have to ask for them. They just appeared in my inbox, like right after the appointment got scheduled, which is awesome. So you definitely make it easy. And that's how you continue to win business. And then people refer that you're top of mind when they are thinking about another event or something coming up. So just those little tidbits can make such a big difference. So for everybody listening, as we're all virtual for a while now. But remember those circle back calls in all of your emails, removing those I statements, and definitely suggesting specific times, making it easy on the other person to do business with you. And I believe that Nikki has a couple things she can share with us. So you have your podcast that just launched, which I'm so excited about, and some other cool stuff. So go ahead and tell us about where those things are.
Thank you. Well, the podcast is out. However you listen to podcasts, you should be able to find my podcast there. If you just look up Sales Maven, you'll find it. And then for your listening audience, I always like to give a little gift when I get to come and be a guest on a podcast. And it is my ebook called Closing the Sale. And it walks you through some of the steps and some of the language of how to move kind of from discovery to the close. So to get that, if you go to my website, yoursalesmaven.com and then /Brainy, then you will receive the ebook on building confidence around closing the sale. So I'd love to give that to anybody who will benefit from it. So thank you for having me on. And once you're on my website, then I'm there. You can message me. You can reach out to me if there's any way that I can support you. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, links to all the socials and everything. I'm sure it's all there waiting.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Nikki, and for being the first repeat visitor on the podcast. As always, it has been lovely chatting.
Thank you.
What did I tell you? Fantastic stuff, right? Nikki is so smart, and her real genius is in the way she can frame a selling message. I always joke with her that I wish I could have my own sort of like mini Nikki inside my brain whenever I'm having my own sales conversations. When it comes to selling, she always knows the perfect thing to say. And another thing I love about her approach is it's all about building strong relationships, not being a pushy salesperson, but getting to know people, engaging with them, understanding what their needs are, and finding ways you can genuinely help them in their life or business. I try to emulate that here at the Brainy Business too, and know that you will all enjoy anything you get from Nikki. It's 100% worth the time. Whether you take her up on the offer of her free gift of the Closing the Sale ebook, which is linked for you in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/96. Or if you sign up for her newsletter, which you absolutely should. She has tons of great content. It's one of the few that I read religiously. Or if you check out one of her full books or like her page on Facebook or subscribe to the Sales Maven podcast, again, it's all linked for you in the show notes. She has so much great stuff she's giving to the world. I promise all her words are worth their weight in gold. You will not be disappointed. Thanks again to my dear friend, Nikki Rausch, your Sales Maven, for joining me today. I hope that you all enjoyed our conversation as much as I did, and I'm guessing she did too. Next week, it's time for a Behavioral Economics Foundations episode. This one is on the peak end rule. It's going to be a lot of fun. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Molina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.